on Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis. We're almost at the end of this page, and we learned yesterday about the different fires, flames of the different colors of a flame, and that would be the source of the argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. If you say Ma'or ha'esh or Ma'irei ha'esh, it's either singular or plural. And the Gemara concluded that the Gemara concluded that it's an argument if there how many lights there are in the flame, which seemed surprising that there could be an argument in facts. I mean, it seems the fact is that there are more than one color to the light. So yesterday we explained based on a Vilna Gaon that he wants to explain the argument. It depends if you're praising Hashem specifically for the element of fire. And if you're praising Hashem for the element of fire, maybe the element of fire might only have one color, but the actual fire has many colors. So if you're only praising Hashem for the original, the element of fire, then that would be Beis Shammai's view. And Beis Hillel is including not only the original element of fire, but also the lights that we have today of fire, and therefore there's more than one light that comes out of fire, and therefore you would call it Me'orei ha'esh. It would be plural. Now, I was thinking that maybe there might be room to say that maybe there could be an argument of which of I'm not sure. Maybe a scientist or someone who understands, maybe has studied flames and fire, but maybe there could be a way of understanding that the light that comes from a flame, maybe the light that comes from the flame comes specifically from one part of the flame, meaning as we're thanking Hashem for the light, that it's giving off light. And the part that gives off light might be specifically the yellow part of the flame that gives off light. And maybe the other part might be considered, might give off light, but it might be insignificant compared to the main. And therefore, you could possibly give another explanation of why Beis Shammai says, Ma'or ha'esh, this is the source of light from the fire, because he's saying, well, really, the source of light from the fire comes from only one part of the fire, and that's really what gives off the light. Maybe the other colors in the fire don't really give off much light. And Beis Hillel might argue and say, well, they're still significant, at least, and therefore, Beis Hillel sees it that you have to thank Hashem for all of the light that comes from the fire. So maybe you could come up, if you look into the science of light and understand it a little better, maybe there could be room to give an explanation to this argument. Yes, Ben.
The colors in the fire tell you the temperature in the flame. Blue is less hot. The white is the most hot. So when you're welding or when you're soldering, you always know where you want to touch the metal with which part of the flame.
So when you're soldering, you want the hottest part, so you use the white.
If you want the hottest, you go to the white. If you want a little less, it's the blue. The red is I think at the tip is either blue or red. I don't remember.
So the question is, what about light? The light that comes from a flame. Where does
the brightest light is the
I'm sorry. I muted you by mistake. I meant to mute the other iPad. 1 second.
The brightest part of the light of the flame is the brightest light is the white in the flame.
The white that would give off the most light.
The brightest.
So maybe that's why Beis Shammai says it's one light, because if you're looking for light, that's the main thing. Everything else is insignificant compared to the white, maybe.
It's less. I wouldn't say insignificant, but
right.
less.
But I'm just saying maybe that's Beis Shammai's view, and Beis Hillel is saying it's not insignificant. Maybe, I'm just throwing another thought there based on science, based on the light that comes out of the flame.
I did a lot of soldering in my life.
Okay, so that was the previous Gemara about the bracha borei minei besamim, and now we're doing the next little piece of the Mishnah. We're explaining the next piece of the Mishnah, and the next point of the Mishnah had to do with reciting a bracha on a candle and on besamim of goyim. And when we mention the halacha of reciting bracha for Havdalah on the besamim and the fire of goyim, the Mishnah also included and mentioned about the laws of mesim and avodah zarah. In other words, there used to have been a custom after a person passes away, they would put some spices nearby in order to remove the bad smell. The Mishnah told us that you can't recite a bracha on that type of besamim. They also used to put a flame near the mace, and the Mishnah says you can't recite a bracha on that flame. And then it says you can't do either the bracha on the flame, or the besamim of avodah zarah, which means that they used to bring incense to idols, and you wouldn't be allowed to recite the bracha on that smell that comes from that incense of avodah zarah. So the Gemara here says, we're on page 52b, the bottom of the page, about 5 lines up from the bottom. Ein mevarchin chulu, we do not recite a bracha, not on the ner, not on the besamim of goyim. So the Gemara wants to know why. But just because the goy has a flame, why can't we recite a bracha? What's wrong with the goy's flame, goy's spices? So bishleim and ner, the Gemara says, it's good, ner, that we cannot recite a bracha on the flame of a goy, mishum delay shavas, because it did not rest. Now, Rashi here tells us that the mishum delay shavas, that it didn't rest. Rashi says it didn't rest from a sin because the goy is doing work with that light. So if the light was lit in order for a goy to do work with, so that would be a light that did not rest, loy shavas. In other words, in order to recite a bracha on Motzei Shabbos, thanking Hashem for teaching mankind of how it's possible to have a flame, have light from a flame. And so Hashem taught Adam Arishan about it Motzei Shabbos, Saturday night. And so we thank Hashem for that. We want a candle that gives off light, that the purpose is light. And that candle can't be a candle that sin was done with it. And the sin that the Gemara understands here is that the candle was used on Shabbos for someone to do work with. With the light. If someone did work with the light, therefore you wouldn't be allowed to use that candle. Now we know a goy is allowed to do work on Shabbos. So this is the hard thing about this Gemara is it seems surprising that we're gonna have a problem using a candle that a goy did something appropriate with. He did work with that candle, and he's allowed to. He's not only allowed to, he's obligated to. A guy is obligated to do work on Shabbos. But the Gemara understands that even though an actual sin was not done with this candle, because a guy is allowed to do work on Shabbos, But when we're reciting a bracha after Shabbos on a candle, it has to be a candle that if a Yid had lit it, it would be appropriate, would be acceptable. And because if a Yid lit it, it wouldn't have been acceptable. Therefore, it's considered like a candle that didn't rest. In other words, we want a candle that, so to speak, that rested on Shabbos. Now, I translated for you Rashi, what Rashi seems to be saying. The only problem is the simple wording of the Gemara would seem like a candle that didn't rest. The simple understanding, I would think, would be that the candle was lit on Shabbos. Not that you did work with the light from the candle, meaning the candle was lit, let's say, even Friday, and you did work on Shabbos with that light, or you lit it. The reason you lit it was to do work on Shabbos with that light. So that's the way Rashi seems to be saying. You did work with the light from. What about the actual lighting of it? The lighting of it was done in a way that it didn't rest, that it was lit on Shabbos. And in fact, Rashi on the next page does translate it that way. So it's a little hard to understand why Rashi here translates it that you did work with the light. But that's what Rashi says. So I'm just throwing to you both ways of understanding Ner Shaloi Shabbos, because Rashi does say both. Rashi later on will say the other way of emphasis on the fact that it was lit on Shabbos. And again, the person didn't do a sin, so it wasn't lit in sin. It was a guy who lit it. But the fact is that this is a candle that did not rest. Considered a candle that didn't rest on Shabbos. And we, in order to recite a bracha of the summon, it's supposed to be a candle that, so to speak, rested on Shabbos. I'm not sure if it has to do with the fact that it should be similar to Adam Harishon's candle. That just like Adam's candle, when Adam figured out how to light it, Adam was the only person on earth, and he lit it. Hashem showed him how to grind two stones together and somehow bang them, and friction causing the stones to create a flame. So for some reason, a ner delay Shabbos is not acceptable. A candle that didn't rest on Shabbos is not acceptable. But what is interesting is we're going to soon see that there are candles that would be acceptable that didn't rest on Shabbos. And that would be, for example, if a person lit a fire for a woman who just gave birth, let's say. So it's permissible on Shabbos to transgress Shabbos, and you lit a candle for that person. They needed you because she just gave birth, and giving birth is considered a very major danger, a life-threatening danger, and so a person would be allowed to recite a bracha havdalah on that candle that that was lit on Shabbos. So that candle we call a ner sheshabbos. That candle is sort of a candle that rested on Shabbos. But the fact that it was lit on Shabbos by a guy is a candle that's called a candle that did not rest on Shabbos. But definitely not so simple to explain, but that's how the Gemara understands it. Again, we'll try to work on understanding how this is considered a candle you can't recite a bracha on. But in the meantime, the Gemara has a problem with the besamim. What's wrong with the spices of a non-Jew? My time aloi. What is the reason that a non-Jew's spices is going to be prohibited from reciting a bracha? So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, you know why you can't recite a bracha besamim, spices, on Abdullah, for the spices that of a non-Jew is hacha b'mesibas oivdei koichavim askinon. We are talking about that it's the spices that are part of a party of goyim. and it's a party where Goyim are celebrating, and they're having a meal together, and you're not allowed to recite a bracha on their spices, on their incense. You know what the problem is? The problem boils down to a problem of idol worship, accessories of idol worship, or things that are sacrificed, so to speak, burned for the idol. These are all prohibited as part of the prohibitions of benefiting from anything that's connected to idol worship. And so because of that, you would not be allowed to have spices from their smell, the spices from their party, because it's considered idol worship spices. Now, the problem with that is that our Mishnah said 3 different prohibitions. One was of a goy, spices or fire of a goy. One was spices and fire of a deceased person. And the third one, the final one, was spices and fire of idol worship. So the Mishnah sort of said idol worship in a different clause, in a separate point. So here it seems that the issue is not idol worship, right? And that's what the Gemara now asks. The Gemara now asks.
You have a question from Mordechai, who's in his car.
Okay, Mordechai, yes.
In the traffic circle.
Yes.
US 6 East
Rail. When it comes to fire, it could also be to avodah zarah, because when the Jews lived among the Persians, the Persians worship fire, and in fact, they forbid the Jews from having fire in their homes on the Persians' holidays. So so there are goyim that worship fire.
It's like a pyromaniacs, they love the fire. So the Persians, So that's interesting. Now, the Gemara is going to answer this question, and the conclusion is that the spices are, for idol worship, right? That's the conclusion. But the question is, what about the previous statement about the fire? The Gemara initially said, fire, we understand, it's because it didn't rest. That's why you can't recite a bracha on a goy's fire. But now the Gemara switches gear and tells us, we're talking about a party of goyim, and the party is probably for avodah zarah. Now that the Gemara switches gear and tells us we're talking about a party of avodah zarah, what this means is that might be the reason of the fire as well, because of idol worship, like Mordechai is saying, that the fire, they also lit fires for their avodah zarah. It doesn't have to be as extreme as what Mordechai is saying. Mordechai is saying they worship the fire itself. We don't have to translate it that way. We could also translate it that the fire is a fire of a party of idol worship, that they're worshiping, that they're lighting the fire to be able to, as part of the accessories of their idols. So in other words, now that we're answering this question, it's sort of logically would make sense to say that this is the reason for fire. We're retracting from our initial understanding of what the prohibition of a fire of a goy was, and we're retracting from that. We're saying the goy's fire is also an issue of avodah zarah, idol worship. And again, I don't know that you have to say it as extreme. That's very interesting. What Mordechai told us, some interesting information, but I don't know if we need to explain it to that extent. We could say that it's simply a fire of that's that part of the fire that they're using for their idol worship. And now what I'm thinking is that maybe that's how what we're talking about is a fire used to be able to worship the idols. This fire was used for light as an accessory for the idol worship. Yes, Robert.
I have 2 questions. One is, since we're dealing with these different statements, rationales, it seems that Havdalah candles have evolved to the present day where we have a candle that's exclusively used for Havdalah, and it's and it is a multi-wicked candle as well. And what's the rationale? Did we evolve, or what was again the progression from dealing with this historically to where we are now with the, you've got the cup, you've got the spices, and you've got the candle. How did that, I'm just curious of why there's so many wicks or it being braided.
Okay, so about the other details of the Havdalah candle, we're gonna learn more about Havdalah.
Okay.
And but the main point, I think, that what evolved is the fact that we have matches and lighters now. That's really what changed everything. Because in the olden days, what did they do? They would want to get a fire from someone who has a fire lit. And they would go to a guy. Oh, you're in the street smoking.
Okay.
Yeah, give me a flame. So the matches and the lighters is really what, the guy had a fire that's lit. In the olden days, that was like perfect. Someone has a fire next door. They have a fire. We'll go to them. But the fact that we've changed things around, that in other words, this doesn't really apply to us. Where do we get a fire from? Oh, we need to find someone with fire. You need to get a fire? Just take a match. Because in the olden days, rubbing wood together, banging rocks, it took time till you pulled together a flame. It was a big headache, and therefore you would take advantage of someone that has a fire that's already lit. So that's really the main. So, but you're right that it evolved. Things have changed, and there's been changes to the Havdalah ceremony. The way it used to be was a sort of it was a big hassle getting fire. Okay, so the Gemara here asks this question about how could we translate that we're talking about a party of idol worship if that is a different clause in the Mishnah. Hamidatani Seifa, since we learned in the end of the Mishnah, Ein mevarchen, you do not recite a bracha for Havdalah, lo yala ner, not on the fire, v'lo yala b'samim, and not on the spices, shel avodah zara, for idol worship. Michlal, from that, it implies the reisha lav ba'avodah zara askinon, that the first part is not talking about a party of idol worship, because that's really a different clause of the Mishnah. So the Gemara answers, Amar Rabbi Chanina Misura, Chanina from Surah answers Makam Kamar, that it's really not two separate clauses. It's really one statement. And it's Rabbi Chanina Misura tells us, you know what it's really saying? It's saying, you know why you shouldn't have a goy's fire? Because Matam ein mevarchin. What's the reason you don't say a bracha? Lo yala ner, not on the fire. V'lo yala b'samim, not on the spices. Shel akum of a non-Jew, mipnei, because shestam misibas oivdei kochavim, the general party of a goyim is la'avodah zara, is for idol worship, and therefore you would not say a bracha of the spices or on the fire of a non-Jew, is because we assume that it's going to be used for idol worship. So that would seemingly be the answer then of the previous point of what was the reason why the Mishnah says you can't use a fire of a non-Jew. It would seem that reason as well, it ends up being because of idol worship. The assumption is that a non-Jew probably is using it for idol worship. Now, the question is, the Gemara answered that we're talking about a mesiba of goyim. We're talking about a party. what happens if you just getting a light from a non-Jew, but it's not part of a party? So again, the Gemara had answered. Rabbi Yehuda Marav says, you know what we're talking about? Mesibas oivdei kochavim. A mesiba, some type of a party where they're all gathering together and partying. So that the Gemara says we assume is a mesibas oivdei, is a avodah zarah. It's for avodah zarah. It's for idol worship. So what ends up happening is, if you look back in the Mishnah said you can't use a light or or spices of goyim. Sounds maybe you can use really of goyim, as long as they're not part of a party of goyim. Now, the Rambam does learn this way, but the Rif seems to say no. It really prohibited all types of besamim, all types of spices of goyim, and it's prohibited. And so it seems that there's an argument among the commentaries, among the Rishonim, among the early commentaries, how to learn, to what extent is it prohibited. Now, the Gemara continues, and it talks about the law of the Or Sheshavas, a fire that rested from work on Shabbos, and a fire that did not rest from work on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis learned, and this is the bottom line of the Gemara, 52b, bottom line. The rabbis learned, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis learned in a brisa, Or Sheshavas, fire that rested, mevarchen olav, you can recite a bracha on it. V'shaloi Shavas, ein mevarchen olav, if it didn't rest, you cannot recite a bracha on it. So that's a brisa. Now the question is, what does that mean? So our Gemara knew of this brisa, obviously, and that's why we initially wanted to explain the Mishnah that way. But in the end, we explained the Mishnah, we're talking about avodah zarah. Now we go back to the law of, what about a fire that didn't rest on Shabbos? Can you recite a bracha thanking Hashem for creating fire on a light, on a fire that didn't rest on Shabbos? So the Gemara says, in parentheses, it says, my Shabbos or my loy Shabbos. What does it mean, Shabbos? What does it mean? What does it mean it rested? What does it mean it didn't rest? And I see they take out the first words over here, my Shabbos. So it says, what does it mean it didn't rest? And the reason why they take out the my Shabbos, what does it mean it rested, is because we don't really explain what it means it rested on Shabbos. We explain what's the problem. The problem is when it didn't rest. So that's what the Gemara says. So what does it mean it didn't rest? So now we're on the next page, 53a, and the Gemara says, nema, if you will say that it means shalei shavas machmas melacha, that it didn't rest from any type of work, from work, afilu malacha mi malacha dehatera, even from work that is permissible, like for someone who's very sick and you did work, you lit the fire, you did work with this fire on Shabbos, but maybe in such a case, you would not be allowed to recite a bracha on that flame. The Gemara says, "V'hatanya," but we learned in a brisa, or shel chaya, the light, the flame of a woman who gave birth, chaya, v'shel chayla, or of a person who's very sick, a person who's sick, a life and death situation, you're allowed to light a fire for them. And that fire, you're allowed to recite a bracha by Havdalah after Shabbos comes out, you could recite the bracha of Abdullah on that fire that you lit on Shabbos. So we see that even fire that malacha was done with, malacha of hetera, it's called malacha permissible work, because you were allowed to light it. Nevertheless, this is allowed. You can recite a bracha on that. So Amar Rab Nachman bar Yitzchok, my Shabbos, Shabbos machmas melechas aveda. So Rab Nachman bar Yitzchok says, you know what it means that it rested. That it rested means that it did do a malacha of avera. A sin was not done with it. That's what it means rested. So what that means is that when it didn't rest, it means a sin was done with it. Tanya nami hachi. We also learned a brisa like this. Ashashis, a lantern. Shahaisa deilekes v'haileches. It was lit and continued. Kol hayom kulei, the whole day. L'motzei Shabbos. After Shabbos, mevarchen Allah. After Shabbos, you could recite a bracha on this candle. And the reason is, why can you recite a bracha on it? Because the candle, even though it was lit a whole Shabbos, but it was lit before Shabbos. And because of that, no avera, no sin was done with it on Shabbos. And therefore, it's permissible to use after Shabbos. So that is the understanding now of what it means that it didn't rest and you can't recite a bracha. It means that it didn't rest, meaning a sin was done with it. The Gemara continues and says, Tanu Rabbanan. The rabbis learned, Nachri shehidlik mi Yisrael, a guy that lit a candle from a Jew. So the Jew had a candle, and a guy lit after Shabbos from that candle. Or Yisrael shehidlik mi Nachri, or a Yid lit a candle from a guy. The guy's candle was lit on Shabbos, and the Yid lit from it after Shabbos. Mevarchen alav, you could actually recite a bracha on the fire from that candle that was lit from a candle that was not appropriate to. So that you could recite a bracha. But it says Nachri, mi Nachri, a non-Jew who lit a candle from another non-Jew, ein mevarchen alav, that you cannot say a bracha. Now this Gemara is very surprised. It doesn't seem to fit any logic. We can't really understand what's wrong with reciting this. You can recite a bracha on, that you can't. If the flame was lit by a Jew on Shabbos, and then a non-Jew took a flame from it, cite a bracha. A non-Jew lit it on Shabbos, and a Jew took a flame from it after Shabbos, say a bracha. But a non-Jew lit from another non-Jew, that is a problem. Why should that be a problem? Why is this okay, and why is that not okay? What would the reason be? Why is it for guy from another guy? In other words, there's the initial fire, and then there's the second degree fire, the one that this fire lit. And if a guy lit the first one, and a guy lit from the first one, that second fire, you can't. Why can't you do it? That you can't use for the bracha of fire. Yes, Ben.
So yeah, I don't see the difference because the goy doesn't have to do any blessing. So if he lights from one to the other, fine. Even a third one, when the Jew takes it from a goy, that's the point.
Yeah,
It
no,
doesn't
but
matter if it's one or two goyim or what.
right, no, but the point over here is that the guy is holding the Havdalah candle, and you're just reciting a bracha.
I see.
Now the guy took it from another guy, so he's holding some fire. I'm calling it a Havdalah candle, whatever it is. He's holding his, he's holding his.
I didn't know
flame.
that they had goyim to hold a candle for them.
That's what I'm saying. He's doing it for some other purpose. He's not doing it for Havdalah. But if you want to call it a Havdalah candle, you're using it for Havdalah. We call it a Havdalah candle. But he's bringing fire to his house. He wants to light his lantern in his house. So he's bringing fire. You see him in the street. So you want to just say a bracha. You don't have your own candle. You're just going to say a bracha on his. So the Gemara says that it brings this brisa that says these things are okay and that's not okay. And the Gemara seems to be very surprised at what, how do you understand the difference between these cases? The Gemara says, Maishna nachri mi nachri delay. Why if one guy from another guy, you can't use that candle, that flame, mishum delay Shabbos, because it didn't rest from a sin on Shabbos? If so, Yisrael minachri nami, a yid that lit a candle from a non-Jew, also haloi Shabbos. That candle, that flame, the original flame, did not rest on Shabbos. So if we are claiming that the flame is the same flame as the original flame, and the original flame you would not be allowed to recite a bracha on because it was lit on Shabbos. So therefore, why should there be a difference if a guy lit from it? If a guy lit from another guy, if a yid lit from it, it's fine. What do you mean? It didn't rest on Shabbos. Again, the fire was lit on Shabbos. The yid took a flame from it. He brought his candle. That, the Gemara says, is okay. But what about if a guy took a flame from it? That, the Gemara says, is not okay. Well, why should there be a difference? And if you want to tell me that, why it's permissible to use, if a yid lights a candle from a candle that's prohibited, in other words, it was lit on Shabbos, but a yid lit a candle from that candle after Shabbos. So if you're going to say, you know what, hachi surah azale, the prohibition that was on the original candle left, ha'achrinahu, and this light is a different light. It's a different flame. Uvidad di Yisrael kamis yalda, and in the hands of the yid, this new flame was created, was born. Kamis yalda, was born. In other words, this is like a new flame. So you want to tell me, you know what? When you light one candle from another candle, the new candle is a new flame, and therefore you're allowed to light. You would be allowed to recite a bracha. So maybe you want to tell me that. Now, the Gemara says that you can't say such a thing. Ela hadatanya. But what about the fact that we have a brisa that says hamoitzi shal heves, if a person takes a flame and he wants to carry a flame on Shabbos. Now we know that you're not allowed to carry on Shabbos, even though there's many cities that have Eruvs. They have an Eruv around the city. And in those cities, you are allowed to carry on Shabbos. But there are places that don't have Eruvs. In places that don't have Eruvs, you're not allowed to carry anything from your house to the outside. You're not allowed to carry stuff outside from going outside of Dalet Amos, 4 cubits, you would be transgressing a biblical prohibition of carrying something outside for Amos. So there's two prohibitions. One is going from inside outside or outside inside, and the other is carrying in a Rishus Harabim, in a public domain, Dalet Amos 4 cubits, 6 to 8 feet. So if a person carries a flame, the Gemara wants to know, L'Rishus Harabim. So he takes it from his possession, from his domain, and he brings it outside. So he changes domains with carrying this flame into the public domain. So the Gemara says, Chayev. He is going to be obligated, and he gets the penalty because he transgressed carrying something from inside to outside, merishus l'rishus, from one domain to another domain. He has transgressed. He is chayev. He is guilty. Amai chayev. So why is he chayev? Why is he considered transgressing? Masha akar lo hiniach, umasha hiniach lo yakar. The Gemara asks a very strong question. He says that why should he be obligated if this is considered a new entity? This flame is a new entity. So what ends up happening is that every moment that the flame is lit, it really is a different entity. It's a different flame, because the previous flame ends and the new flame begins every moment. And in other words, when you hold a apple, so it's the same apple in your hand. But when you have a flame, the flame is constantly living off oxygen, and every moment it's burning up a new part of the wick. It keeps moving, so to speak. The fire needs the fire is really continuously renewing itself. So the Gemara asks that this should be considered like a new flame, and therefore, if it's a new flame every moment, so when you left and when you arrived, in other words, you left your house and you went outside to the public domain, so you put down the fire. So you need to do, whenever in the laws of Shabbos, in order to be to do a full transgression of carrying, what you need to do is take something from one domain, lift it up, bring it to the other domain, and place it down. So the Gemara is asking, you didn't do the lift up and the placing down with the same item. And if you don't do it with the same item, you can't be considered chayiv. You might have done a transgression, but you didn't do a full transgression that you would get the penalty. Chayiv means you are guilty of the penalty, of the punishment. And so the Gemara says that if you want, if you want to look at a flame, you could look at a flame that this is the same flame, or you could look at it that it's the different flame. But if you want to look at it that it's the same flame, that would make sense that you're guilty here because you carried a flame, and even though it's later on and it's it's burning up different things, but it's still the same flame. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is, no, every moment this flame is really a different flame. So if you look at it that way, so then you'll have a question on this brisa, that if you carry a flame outside in a public domain, from a private domain to a public domain, why should you be chayiv? Why would you get the penalty if this is really two separate flames and you didn't do a full melacha, you didn't do a full work with one flame? You did something, you carried halfway with one flame and you put down halfway with the other flame, meaning you didn't do the full work with the full legalities. You didn't do the full action that is prohibited. You did a partial prohibited action. You didn't do a full prohibited action to get the penalty. So the Gemara asks, Masha akar loihiniach, what he uprooted, meaning what he took from the private domain, loihiniach, he did not put down the same item. Umashiniach, on the item that he put down, meaning the flame that he put down, loyakar, he did not uproot that. That's not the thing that he took. And therefore, it's not a full malacha, a full action. And he did a half a sin and another half a sin, but he didn't do a full sin. And he, of course, he transgressed, but he doesn't get but the penalty is not there. So the Gemara sees from this brisa that it must be that it is considered the same flame. The Gemara says, so therefore we'll have to have another explanation of our brisa that has to do with lighting a flame for Motzei Shabbos for Saturday night. Elo li'olam de'isurei nami isa. Must say that the prohibited flame still exists from the original flame, and that would explain the previous brisa that you do get the penalty for carrying a flame. And now to explain the bracha of Havdalah, and this that you can recite a bracha on a flame that a Jew lights from a non-Jew's flame that was lit on Shabbos, what you are reciting, the bracha that you're reciting on Saturday night is not on the original flame that the non-Jew had, but it's on the new flame that you took from the non-Jew. And this that you took from the non-Jew is really considered the same flame. So what do we mean there's an additional, there's the new flame? It doesn't mean the fact that you took it from him and you have a flame now that's considered a new flame. No, it's not really a new flame. It's the same flame that's prohibited. And that flame is still there, but there's an additional element of this flame that you could recite the bracha. And so the additional flame that the Yid has when he lights his Havdalah candle from the guy, there's additional light that's coming out that's connected to that flame, and that is what rested on Shabbos, and that is where you would be allowed to recite a bracha on that additional flame. So the Gemara says that, so how does this answer our problem? It doesn't answer our problem because we still have to understand why when a non-Jew lights the flame from a non-Jew, then it's prohibited. If so, then why when a non-Jew lights it from another non-Jew, why don't we say that the original flame is there, but there's additional flame when you have a new flame? You light something from it, there's something additional there. And that additional element of the flame, you're able to recite a bracha on Saturday night for Havdalah. Why don't we say the same thing for a guy, from a guy to a guy? The guy lights it at Saturday night. The first guy's flame is prohibited. You can't use that flame. That was prohibited on Shabbos. It was lit on Shabbos. You can't use it. But the next guy lights it from him. There's new flame that's there as part of, in addition to the old flame. That part you could say the bracha on. So again, when you're getting light, when you're seeing the light Saturday night from this entire flame, part of it is from the new flame, part of it is from the old flame. And therefore, it should be considered acceptable to recite a bracha even when it's a guy's flame, when the guy lights it from another guy. So the Gemara answers, Einach Hanam. Logically, you're right, the Gemara says. Einach Hanami. You're right. This also should be permissible. But there's a decree here. There's something called a gezerah. The rabbis had a problem that if we permit you to recite a bracha from a guy that's holding a candle and he lit it from a guy that lit it on Shabbos. So in such a case, you know what we're afraid? That you might end up reciting a bracha on the original guy's candle. And a candle that did not have any additional, in other words, you recited the bracha on that original candle that didn't change at all after it got dark, meaning that you recited it right when it got dark, and I'll explain it to you in the words. Einach hanami, the Gemara says, true, in logic, you should be permissible to recite a bracha on this candle, but and the truth is, even the original candle you should be able to recite a bracha on, because every moment that it burns, there is a little additional. The original flame is there, but there's something new that's burning, and therefore you have the original flame and you have something new, and you should be allowed to recite a bracha even on the original flame. But gezeira mishum nachri rishon v'amud rishon. You know what we're nervous of? We're nervous that if we allow you to say the bracha when the guy lights it from another guy, you might end up saying the bracha when the original guy has the flame that he lit on Shabbos. And you'll say it amud rishon, you'll recite the bracha at the amud rishon, at the first flame, the beginning of the flame that was prohibited. In other words, you'll recite a bracha on it right at the beginning. In other words, it's right after Shabbos, and this flame was just lit, and therefore you will have recited a bracha at that time on the original prohibited flame. So the rabbis prohibited a guy's flame that was lit from another guy because we're afraid that you might end up reciting a bracha on an original flame that was lit on Shabbos and so on. But in essence, it should be permissible. Why should it be permissible? Because number one, you have the actual flame was lit a while ago. And as it burns further, there is new parts of the flame that's lit. And therefore, we look at this flame as not only is it the original flame, we look at it as if there's additional fire to it that should be permissible to recite a bracha on Saturday night. On Motzei Shabbos, you should be able to recite a bracha on it. But there is a case where we're nervous that you might end up sinning because you might end up reciting a bracha when you can't. And therefore, we say in that case, you also can't say a bracha on it. What is that case? The case is a guy lights it from another guy who lit it on Shabbos, and say, don't do it, because you might end up thinking, someone will say, oh, you're lighting it from a guy, and this guy lit it from another guy. So you're going to say, I see, it's fine. I can say recite a bracha even when a guy lights it right by the end of Shabbos, and you say the bracha right then because Shabbos was just over. He lit it. It was Shabbos, and Shabbos ended. You said the bracha right then. That would be a problem because it is considered being that would be a problem, because then you're really saying a bracha on a candle that was lit on Shabbos. So again, we're getting very technical at the specifics of how we look at a candle, a flame. What we're saying is that a flame that's lit on Shabbos, as it burns further, is really has on the one hand, it's considered like the same flame. On the other hand, it has additional flames that are joining it from the new things that are burning. And we should be allowed to recite Havdalah on such a flame, even though it was lit on Shabbos, because there's a ner shaloi Shabbos, there's a candle, a flame that did not rest, that's part of this flame. And there's also a flame that did rest, that's part of this flame, because the new additional flame that's connected to it, it did rest on Shabbos, was never sinned, never transgressed the Shabbos. But the thing is that sometimes we can rely on this leniency. Is if a yid lights it from a guy, or a guy lights it from a yid, then we can do it. But if a guy lights it from another guy, then we would have a problem reciting a bracha on Motzei Shabbos on this flame. So that is the Gemara about a flame from a non-Jew, or flame that didn't rest on Shabbos. Any questions? Okay, so let's continue with the next piece of Gemara. What happens if you don't know if the flame that you're seeing is of Goyim or of Yidden? Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis learned in a brisa. Haya mahalech, if a person was going on Saturday night, chutz l'krach, outside of the city. So he's leaving the city, and he sees a fire, he sees a flame. Someone has a flame in their house. But he doesn't know. Imraiv nachrim einay mavarich. If the majority are goyim, then he can't say a bracha, because it was probably a candle that didn't rest on Shabbos. V'imraiv Yisrael, if the majority of the inhabitants are Yidden, mavarich, you could say a bracha on this candle, on this flame. So you go by majority. What's the question on this Gemara? If it's majority Yidden, you say a bracha. Majority Goyim, you can't say a bracha. You can't use it for fire. What's the question on this Gemara? What happens if it's half and half? Right? What about half and half? So the Gemara says, Hagufa Kasha, this itself is a question. Why do you tell me majority this, majority that? You got to tell me what's the law about half and half. There's a point where you skip the middle. Hagufa Kasha, Amrit Imraiv Nachrim Einay Mavar. You said if the majority are Goyim, you can't say a bracha. Ha mechza al mechza, if it would be half and half. Mevarich, you should be able to say a bracha, right? Because majority Goyim implies that if it's not majority Goyim, you can say a bracha. You can rely that it's a candle that rested. V'hadar tani, then it learned, Imraiv Yisrael Mevarich, only if it's majority Yidden you can say a bracha. That implies Hab, but if it would be Mechza al Mechza, Einay Mevarich, that implies if it's half and half, you can't say the bracha. So why did the Brisa pick both cases that are talking about, why did the Brisa pick both cases that are talking about, they're talking about majorities when there is a scenario that we should have clarified? What's if it's half and half? It doesn't make sense to say if it's majority this, then that, and if it's majority that, then you're skipping the most. You have to tell me what's the most important part. Which majority ruins it? Which majority makes it? Which, not this majority or that majority. You're skipping the middle case. So the Gemara answers, Bedin, really, afilu mechza al mechza nami mevarich. Even half and half, you also would recite a bracha. You could recite a bracha, even if it's half Yidden, half Goyim. You could recite a bracha, boirei miyorei ha'esh. You could rely on the fact that it's not a goyz. It's not a candle that was. It's not a candle that was lit on Shabbos. Va'idi reisha Rav Nachrim Tana Seifa Rav Yisrael. That just for semantics, it used the word majority, but it doesn't mean majority. It really is, even if it's half and half, you're allowed to use that. You're allowed to use that flame. Okay, to be continued tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Great.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.